All right, well, it is 4 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. We have Mr. Trowell on the line as well. Everyone else is muted. Mr. Trowell, just to verify, can you hear me right now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir. So today's meeting is a little bit different in that we're doing this virtually. Keep hearing the phrase new normal, and unfortunately this is part of that new normal. I guess the fortunate side of it though is the fact that we have more attendees. Typically when we do this session here in the dining room, we have anywhere from 20 to 40 members attend, and it looks like online right now we have 53, and there's a few more signed up. So I think this, as I said, will become part of the new normal as we do things going forward, just as we have been with the board meetings. This is something we'll probably do going forward so that those that are not local can attend sessions like this. Since this session is a little bit different, first I'd like to let everyone know that we are recording this session, and we'll publish that later. There is an opportunity for Q&A at the end, and you should see on the right side of your screen an option to submit a question. There's a possibility, if you're not seeing the full menu, there is an orange arrow. If you hit that arrow, it opens up a menu, and within that menu you should see an option for questions, and then you can type in a question. I'd recommend holding the questions closer to the end of the session because hopefully some of your questions will be answered as we go through the session. And then at the end, Ben will read off any questions that we receive, and I will address those. And if you're viewing this after it's been recorded and published, you can feel free to email me or call me with any questions that you might have. So with that, I will get into the presentation. Kind of the overarching theme for the budget this year was budgeting for the future and for the COVID-19 impacts, as you see on the screen. Obviously, the COVID-19 impacts are significant, and we'll talk about management's estimates as far as those impacts as we go into the new fiscal year. And budgeting to the future speaks to reserving for our existing assets, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So we will get right into it. Just one sec. That's not moving. There we go. All right. So as we do every year, we budget to the club's vision, mission, and core values. This is all that much more important this year when we talk about prudent fiscal management. There's obviously a lot of unknowns with the with COVID-19. So we'll talk about how we made some of our projections and estimates for the coming fiscal year. It's also important that this is reflective of our core values, especially when we talk about responsibility, the financially stable community. And the responsibility for the coming year is even more so important when we talk about the responsibility to not only the members of the club, but the employees, to make sure that we're budgeting appropriately so that we can do things as safely as possible, as well as it says under excellence, providing facility, service, and activity. So the way we approach this budget plan, we needed to plan for an eventful year as best we can, while we make adjustments throughout the year based on the impacts from COVID-19. And Ben will talk about that a little bit later as we get into food and beverage. So before we get into the next fiscal year, let's talk a little bit about the current fiscal year. I know there's been some questions, rumors about the current fiscal year and the potential of an assessment. Good news is, I'd like to start off by saying that there is no planned assessment for the current fiscal year. Now, there are some variables that come into play, and quite significant variables. The biggest one is the Paycheck Protection Program. As we've announced before, the club was able to receive the Paycheck Protection Program loan, which is a formula based on the number of employees and payroll over the course of a certain period of time. So the loan that Stonebridge was able to acquire through the PPP was $876,000. Is a loan, but there is a possibility, great possibility for forgiveness of that loan, and then it becomes a grant. There are still some uncertainties or unknowns when it comes to the forgiveness. There continues to be changes at the government level as far as how that forgiveness is going to take place. But every direction is right now would be that the loan would be fully forgiven and it would become a grant. Additionally, for the remainder of this fiscal year, while it's only a month and a half, we have the unexpected additional impacts from COVID-19 on this current fiscal year. So the long story short, for fiscal year 20, the good news is no planned assessment. We do not anticipate there to be an assessment for this current fiscal year. So now we'll talk a little bit about the budgeting process for fiscal year 21. It started back in June with the department managers completed their draft of the respective budgets, both for operating and capital. Then in July, myself and Debbie, the controller, met with each of the department managers to review and challenge every line item of their budgets. This year, that process took quite a lot more time because we ran different scenarios as impacted by COVID-19. So in golf, that means we ran scenarios with single rider versus double rider, shoulder months in the summer being busy as they have been since the impacts of COVID-19, food and beverage running a number of different scenarios, and we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail as we go through the presentation. Then on July 23rd, we had the Finance Committee's budget workshop, and that's an in-depth review of all of the departmental budgets. Each of the department managers presents their budget to the committee, and they have a chance to ask questions about every line item, and that's about a 4-hour session altogether. A week after that, we had a similar session with the board of directors, about a 3-hour session, again, where each of the department heads come in and present their respective budgets. And then on August 5th, we had the Finance Committee hold a follow-up meeting to review and discuss the capital reserve study. So this is an important item because we had the capital reserve study done. We haven't had the capital reserve study done since the renovation of the clubhouse. So it's been 6 or 7 years since we did that. So this is very important to make sure that we are adequately reserving for our existing assets. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail as we go through. Today is the next step in this process, the budget process. So today is the town hall meeting. That is then followed by the Finance Committee's meeting on August 21st, and then they make the recommendation to the board for the budget. And then on August 28th, the board of directors will vote on the budget plan. The budgeting process includes a large number of individuals, both from the management team as well as the Finance Committee and the board of directors. Those are all listed up on the screen. And I just want to thank everyone because this, by far, in all my years here, has been the most challenging budget development year to date because of the unknown impacts and the estimates that we had to make based on COVID-19. So you can see both from a member and management side, a lot of individuals who dedicated a lot of time to the process. So I just want to thank everyone for that. So there are basically two large buckets when we look at the budget. There's the operational components, and then there's the capital piece. So we'll start by talking about the operational piece. There's basically three segments of the operational budgets. So that is the club dues, and the club dues subsidize the club operations. So that's food and beverage, golf, etc. Then there's the master-based assessment, sometimes called the common area budget, and that covers the common areas. So that would be landscaping of common areas. Currently bulk TV, next year that's bulk TV and internet services, and then also the gate access team members. The third component is the F&B service charge, and that's the essential part of the F&B service team's compensation. So all three of these basically make up the operational components, and you can see for fiscal year 20, that totaled $7,178. The proposed budget for fiscal year 21 is $7,519, which is an increase of $341. That comes out to about I think it's 4.7% increase. I should add that one of the budget scenarios that we ran was a non-COVID budget. So if COVID never hit, what 21 would look like, and that $341 increase would have been nominal if it weren't for the COVID impacts. In fact, when we ran the initial non-COVID budget, the operational components only totaled a 0.5% increase. So you can see that about 4% of the 4% of the total increase really is COVID related, and we'll talk about how that impacts operations, but it also impacts not only the revenue categories but our expense categories as well. Janitorial for extra cleaning services, the electrostatic spraying that we're doing every night, PPE for the employees, and the list goes on and on. So we'll talk about that as we go through. The other piece of the other bucket, so to speak, of the Stonebridge budget is the capital components. So there are two components there. One is the capital reserve assessment, and the other is the clubhouse renovation dues. Obviously, the clubhouse renovation dues does not change year over year. That's $885 per member per year. That's due to be paid off in around February of 2023. But the capital reserve assessment is the one that we've spent a lot of time on and a lot of work on the behalf of the Finance Committee. We worked with Drew Isaac, which is the same reserve analysis that we used after the club renovation, and they looked at every asset that is owned by the association. I should state that we do not reserve for buildings, for structures. We reserve for components. So that would be the roof, carpet, air conditioners, bulkheads on the golf course. All of the different components are in this reserve analysis. It's a 30-year reserve analysis, and when we looked at every component, we did find that we were not sufficiently reserving for existing assets. And I think that's an important point to make, existing assets, because as you see on the screen, this does not cover aspirational projects, meaning it doesn't cover if we wanted to build a building or do something new. This is strictly for the existing assets. So in fiscal year 20, the total of these two line items was $1,985. In 21, $2,194, or an increase of $209. So this is more of an impact to the overall cost of ownership. Obviously, you can see that's roughly a 10% increase on this capital bucket portion of the budget. But again, this is getting us where we need to be sufficiently reserving for the existing assets. And while this is a bit of a jump in 1 year, this is not something we would see a significant jump year over year, because this is more getting us where we need to be. Another way to look at this, and we discussed it at the Finance Committee, was had we been doing a reserve analysis every year, we wouldn't be looking at this type of a jump. Again, it was probably about 7 years ago we did the reserve analysis. So if you divide that increase by the 7 years, it would have been about a $30 increase year over year. And you'll note on the slide that going forward, we are going to be doing the reserve analysis every year, so that we don't have this type of an increase in a given year. So now we'll take a look at the budget summary comparison. So this is the total of the operations and the capital components. So that brings the total cost of ownership to $9,713. That's a $550 increase at 6%. Now, there's a few things that we want to keep in mind. While this is a relatively modest increase, there's a lot of things that are built into this budget. There's a lot of things that are impacting this budget. First off, as I said before, there's no fiscal year 20 assessment plan. The COVID-19 continues to impact operations. We're assuming well into fiscal year 21, and we've budgeted accordingly. There are cost savings that we have in fiscal year 21. One of those is the bulk agreement. We go live with Hotwire in December. The first 6 months of Hotwire are actually no charge per our agreement. So not only will the association be saving money, but that flows through to you as owners. You'll also be able to save money after you go live with Hotwire because likely you'll be able to cancel other ancillary retail services such as internet. You're probably paying for a DVR or high definition with Comcast as a retail service right now. All of that's included when you switch over to Hotwire. So I've talked to a number of members, and the range of what they will likely save is pretty wide. Some members, it may just be a few dollars. Other members, it could be over $100 a month. So there is savings directly to the membership on the out-of-pocket costs, let's say, for the retail services. On that note, you should have received an email from Hotwire. We will also be distributing that from the club that they are starting the on-site installations within units next week. So if you haven't scheduled your installation, contact them, and the sooner you go live, the sooner that you'll be saving money. Another cost savings in fiscal year 21 is we pulled forward some expenses into the end of fiscal year 20. So there's some things that we're doing now, July, August, and September, that are expenses that otherwise may have hit in October and November in the new fiscal year. The PPP gives us the funding to be able to do that. So we're able to pull forward some expenses, again, minimizing the impact on the fiscal year 21 budget. Additionally, we're also moving more of the gate access employees in-house. That's something we've done over the last couple of years and has worked and served the community well. There's also cost increases in fiscal year 21. Of course, there's the COVID-related increases, as I've talked about, with janitorial, PPE, and disposables like takeout. We're doing a lot more takeouts and more paper products. Another area that is an impact in next year's budget is the allowance for doubtful accounts. Typically, we allow for one doubtful account, meaning one significantly delinquent account. And we know from 2007 and 8 from the housing crash, at that point, we were up to 4 in our doubtful accounts. So we've estimated, we budgeted in fiscal year 21 to have the potential of 4 doubtful accounts. So that's built into the budget. Another significant increase was on the property and casualty insurance. That went up quite significantly, close to 20%, and that was seen pretty much across the board in the industry, if not more in some cases. So that equaled about $35,000 of an increase in fiscal year 21. And when I say 20%, the rate increase I think was closer to 16 and change percent. But then we also budget, it's a mid-year, it's a renewal I think in July. So we budget for an increase next July. So it nets out to a total year-to-year budget increase of 20%. The good news is we've been working with a broker for employee health insurance, and that actually remained flat. There was no increase on the employee health insurance, but on the property and casualty, we're seeing increases across the board. And then, of course, the other piece is the increase based on our independent reserve study that I spoke to earlier. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and he can talk a little bit about what the expectations are for the food and beverage operations next fiscal year.
Sure, thank you, Tim. And just going off of what Tim said earlier, this is in terms of budget process and trying to forecast what's going to happen in the next fiscal year has been, the most challenging budget process that I've been a part of. But there's a lot of factors that we've put into consideration that really reflect the number that we came to. And I just want to touch on some of those things so that you can understand the rationale of where we were coming from with the forecast for our revenue and expenses for the food and beverage department. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic is going to carry on well into next year as far as it impacts club operations. As you can see on the screen, we're not sure what the demand is for dining and events, driven by the members' willingness and comfort to utilize the amenities. There's possibility of several seasonal members either are going to be in Florida for a shorter time or not at all for fiscal year 21. And specifically, some of our international members, Tim, it's what, 8%?
Yeah, 8% of our total membership have an international address, and most of those are actually Canadian. 5% of our total membership have a Canadian address, and the balance is mostly European.
Right. So and then a lot of those folks are heavy users of the club. So if they're not here, it's definitely going to affect volume revenues that we generate in food and beverage. There's also the presidential executive order that put a moratorium on bringing in H-2B visa workers until January of 2021. Typically, we start our H-2B program in October to expand our hours of operation and the ability to be open in multiple venues simultaneously. So in light of that limitation, we're forecasting that we'll, through October through December, we'll be open in just one food and beverage venue at a time, whether that's, in the bistro for lunch or upstairs for a la carte on a Friday night, or if there is an event that we do get to put on, that'll be the only thing going at the club during that kind of first quarter of fiscal year 21, and that's what we're forecasting. Uncertainty of event programs is a big factor. We've also put in a system to evaluate the likelihood of an event being able to be held as well, or modified in some way, or postponed indefinitely. So that is a 90, 75, and then 60-day review that's going to occur within the management team with Tim and Amy and myself, and then we're going to work closely with the House Committee to make sure that they're aware of what our capabilities are, and we certainly want their opinion on what the members are going to want to participate in as well. There's also a great chance that the rental market is going to look different for those peak season months, January through April, where we do a lot of business from the rental units. So that's another area that's just uncertain, and these are all factors that cause us to scale back our projected revenue numbers, and a lot of expenses got scaled back as well. The service wages, culinary wages, we took in a factor of about 10% to decrease that to be in line with what we feel the reduced revenues are going to be. So this next slide is just kind of a breakdown of what we think the year is going to look like. Like I said in the previous slide, October through December in 2020, we forecast an operational plan that limits to one dining venue open at a time. So that's something you can expect from October through December. January 1, we're hopeful that we'll have the return of our H-2B employees, and most everyone who has been with the program over the last 3 to 4 years is on board to come back next year. So that's a great thing for continuity of the membership, and they're very much part of the Stonebridge family. So that's important to us. So it's assumed those months, January to April, will most likely have a quote unquote what a normal year in Stonebridge would look like, i.e. be open in the bistro, entertainment on a Friday night, still have the upstairs, grow room, dining room venue open for prime rib night, and all the events and hopefully programs that we've previously done in the past will be able to continue, or if not, modify it in some way that adheres to the CDC guidelines and keeps the safety of the members and the staff as the #1 priority. May through September, and we forecasted those months as typical off-season volume that we would get with reciprocals coming in for lunch, and having roughly 35 to 37% of our year-round residents still here. And like I said, regarding events, we have a procedure in place to monitor the event schedule from a 60 to 90-day outlook, and that'll determine how and when we hold these events, and it'll also allow us to save expenses on items like decor and bands, any of the expense items that are typically associated with an event. We'll be able to save that. So those are numbers that if we don't hold those events, that's not going to be going to the bottom line as an expense. We're going to be able to repurpose that as much as possible. So.
Good. Thanks, Ben.
Sure.
Yeah. And to expand on that, the 60, 90 day, we will have a shorter window of time to make adjustments that we need to when it comes to regular dining hours of operation. The 60 to 90 day really kind of falls in line with our reservation policy. But for dining reservations, it's 2 weeks out. So that gives us a greater level of flexibility as we plan and have to make adjustments on the regular dining schedule.
Absolutely.
So, so that's kind of what food and beverage is going to look like for the coming year. Obviously, the key thing is flexibility. There's going to be changes, some that may have to be made on the fly based on the COVID-19 impacts. So we'll talk a little bit about the golf operations. So this is an item that we probably spent the most amount of time discussing at both the finance and board workshops. And this is still quite fluid. Obviously, we don't know exactly how things are going to transpire this season. And we are still looking at various options. And these options will be reviewed with the Golf and Green Committee. Like Ben said, with food and beverage, House Committee is going to be involved in some of those questions and decisions and things we have to do on the dining side, and the same with golf operations with the Golf and Green Committee. What we assumed is that from a budgeting perspective, is that we would continue single rider. We are, like I said, looking at other options. Some clubs are using a divider to separate the driver and the passenger. We looked at one version of a divider, and honestly, we weren't satisfied with that. But we know that there are other options out there. So this is still, like I said, very fluid. But we are anticipating less rounds in revenue November through April from a budgeting standpoint. We anticipate that we'll have more member rounds in revenue in the summer and shoulder months. And that's just based on the trend of what we've seen over the last few months. As members are not necessarily comfortable going to other clubs for reciprocals, we're certainly having a lot more play here at the club, and our budget projections assume that would continue. So that's baked into the budget plan as well. This budget plan also assumes, again, it's an assumption at this point, but we're assuming that members will have the ability to continue to walk during the day through season, as long as we are continuing with the single rider, and that would continue as we have budgeted a $10 fee, the walking fee, as we have been doing. We've also anticipated in this budget that the outside services would resume in January, hopefully before January. So that would be the bag storage and the bag handling. But again, it's all very fluid, but that's baked into the budget as well. And as Ben said, the lack of potential renters for the coming season is also anticipated in the budget plan. In talking to Katie, we have been receiving rental applications a little bit slower than prior years, but nothing too startling at this point. But she's getting more questions from renters or comments from renters that they are planning to kind of hold off on committing to the rental at this point until they kind of a wait and see. Katie did note that we have some new renters that haven't rented here in the past that are joining us this coming season, and that may be a sign that there's more units available than in the past. So, so that certainly will have an impact, as well as as Ben said, the members coming back to the club, coming back to Naples, and then their comfort level using the amenities. So all of those components, as many as there are, as the finance committee and the board knows, are all baked into that total cost of ownership of 6%. And with that, I'd open it up to Q&A. What we'll do, as I said before, Ben will read off any questions that come in through the Q&A function. If you see a chat function, which I don't think you can, but don't use the chat, just use the Q&A function. And then that'll come right through to Ben. He can read the question, and then I will do my best to address it. Anything so far?
All right, so we had one question from Larry Linder at the beginning of the meeting, which is asking, will you be using last year's September 1 financial letter for comparison?
Financial letter for comparison. That doesn't ring a bell for anything. As we went through the budget, and maybe your question is more budget to budget, I'm assuming. And as we went through the presentation, that's exactly what we were showing, the fiscal year 20 budget and then the 21. But we can have Debbie follow up directly with Mr. Linder if that's not the question that was being asked.
Sure. And I have one message from Mr. Trowell in the chat here. It says, don't forget to tell members there will be a presentation on the reserve study at the Friday, August 28th Board of Directors meeting, which is next week.
Good point. Thank you, Mr. Trowell.
Take a couple more questions coming in here.
End of the month, yeah.
Yeah, the end of the month, sorry.
This is a new function for us, so just bear with us.
Pardon the pause here. We will get to all your questions. Okay. This question is from Dixie Bibb. She says, I understand the rationale for one dining event until January, but why the delay in bag handling and storage?
Good question. And again, that's assuming we'll resume those services in January. We don't know yet that that's going to happen, but that's what's assumed as far as the budget plan. We've assumed in the budget the bag storage fee, and it's really going to depend on how things develop over the coming months as far as the virus goes. We're staying in close contact with other clubs to find out what they're doing, and I only know of a couple of clubs that have resumed bag storage and bag handling. There needs to be a comfort level with the staff in doing so. So it's unfortunately a wait and see. We want to see things improve, and we want to make sure the staff is comfortable doing it.
Okay, another question from Ray Whitehead. Is it possible to refinance the clubhouse debt to a lower interest rate? Great
question. The current answer is no. We've actually have I shouldn't say that. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. But right now, we actually have an incredibly good interest rate for the clubhouse renovation loan of 3.5%, and we have not seen anything lower than that for that type of loan. So refinancing right now wouldn't save money. The question would be is if we were trying to pull more money forward for a quote unquote aspirational project, but not for the purpose of saving on an interest rate. Like I said, right now we're at 3.5%, which is the best of any club in town as we've investigated.
All right, next question is from Jim Gett. He asks, are there any changes to the fee schedule, i.e. cart fees, guest golf fees, etc.?
Great question, Mr. Gett. No change to the fee schedule. The only thing that is different is the $10 fee for walking. As far as a year over year, you wouldn't have seen that on the fee schedule last year, but it will be on the schedule this year, just as we've been charging that fee since April-ish timeframe. So no other change on cart fee, greens fees, or anything else.
Okay. Question from Kathy Rushalk. She asked, were Vasari players counted in the comparison for golfing next summer?
No, we have a general estimate for reciprocal play, which is greatly reduced, but no, not specifically for Vasari. In fact, we didn't see as much as we had anticipated from Vasari just because of the lack of availability to play. Again, because so many of our members were playing and they have priority over tee times, reciprocals, Vasari or otherwise, didn't have much access to the tee sheet other than late in the day, which is not too appealing these days.
All right, next question we have is from Larry Linderer. Says, you've done a great job in a difficult situation. Would you consider giving us a history of increases, dollars and percentage on areas like dues, master base, F&B, CapEx, or capital assessment, etc.?
Sure. We don't have that slide in the deck today, but it's right around 3% is our historical average. So if we go back, I think it's 10 years is the schedule that we use. It averaged out to about 3% on an annual basis. Total cost of ownership.
All right, I have another question from Jim Gett. It says, does the 6-month Hotwire postponement of their contract charges begin December 1 when Comcast's contract ends? Also note that some of us will be on Hotwire and off of Comcast as early as next week.
So the December 1 is the start of the 6-month no charge with Hotwire. So for a lot of you, like Mr. Gett is saying, if you're getting installed as early as next week, you're getting the bonus of not only the 6 months free, but the remainder of August, September, October, November. There is no charge for those services. That's basically Hotwire's kind of ramp up time. So there's no charge to the association. Now, if you have additional retail services with Hotwire, let's say you're paying for HBO, obviously you'll have to pay for those retail services, but we will not be paying bulk until after that 6 months ends, which begins December 1. So we're actually receiving, in many cases, up to 9 months of free service for some homeowners. So that's a win for everybody.
Sure is, and it looks like that's all of our questions, unless somebody has another question they'd like to put into the queue for us.
And I think, oh, there's one.
Oh, there's one. A comment from Captain Rushoff says, kudos to getting the loan. We know it took a lot of quick work and many night hours.
Thank you, Mrs. Rushoff. It certainly did. Thanks to Debbie, it was quite an undertaking to do the PPP, but it's a government program, which is exactly what we're using it for, which is to keep the employees on payroll versus having to make the tough decision of curtailing or closing certain operations and furloughing the employees.
All right, another question here from Kevin O'Flaherty. Says, does the no assessment announcement for fiscal year 20 mean that the $876K PPP money is spent?
So we anticipate right now that the fiscal year without PPP would end probably somewhere in the range of about 450 to 500,000 shortfall, and that's reflected in the monthly financials as we get to the end of the year. After the PPP loan is forgiven, then for our auditors, we can reflect it against that shortfall, and then we would actually not only cover the shortfall, but we would have a surplus with the balance being the difference. So that could be in the range of about $450,000. Hopefully that answers that sufficiently. Anything to add to that, Debbie?
Also, Larry Trial has a response or a follow-up response to Mr. Linderer's question. So this year, the major impact to operations is COVID, and the major impact to capital is the reserve catch-up based on the reserve study findings.
Good point. Yeah. All right. Well, everyone's had probably about a 10-minute window to type questions in, so hopefully we've been able to address everything. Again, I appreciate everyone's taking the time to join us. We have 68 on the call with us, so thank you for joining us. This is a record number for a budget workshop, so that's excellent. We got one last question. I think this came in.
One more at the 11th hour here. From Andrea Kent, she asked, will the storage fee be prorated since we only used it for 3 months?
The bags, so that's the bag storage.
Bag storage.
That's the bag storage fee for this year. We have not discussed prorating that since there's a monthly fee, which essentially 3 months of use is, if you were paying monthly, is equal to, very close to equal to the full year. So we have not discussed any type of refund on the current year. We're just hopeful that we can get it back up and running by January. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. And we will have this published online here shortly so that the rest of the membership can see it. Thank you again for joining. Take care.